topics, but today she is going to focus on a publication that she did with two of my teaching colleagues at Florida State, Melissa Gross and Don Latham, who wrote the article, The Information Literacy Continuum, Mapping the ACRL Framework to the ASL School Library Standards. So I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth now, and I hope you will enjoy her talk.
Great, thank you, Nora. I'm going to share my screen if you all will just bear with me for just one moment as I set up. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to spend my morning with you all, my neighbors to the south in Carolina. So welcome. I am going to have a few opportunities for you to engage with my presentation and the materials throughout. So I hope that I leave you with the opportunity to have questions at the end. I anticipate having a few minutes for questions at the end, but also feel free to pop them in the chat if they're just burning questions, and if it seems appropriate, I'll stop and answer them right then. If not, I'll certainly go back and monitor the chat and make sure that any questions that you have are addressed. I also, here's my email address at the bottom here, and I have it again at the end of the presentation. So feel free to contact me with any questions or need for information if you need follow-up at the end of the presentation today. I just want to give you a little bit of information about myself. Nora did a great job introducing me, but for many of you, you don't know me. So just to give you a little bit of background about me, I really do come from an education background. I was a classroom teacher first. My undergrad work was in education. So I was a classroom teacher. I did that for several years. And then when I went back to do my graduate work, it was for school librarianship in the education field. So I dipped my toes in library work, but really I consider myself a professional educator and a teacher. And that's really where I align much of my research and much of my teaching practice. I did get my PhD in curriculum instruction, not library studies, though I did emphasize in school librarianship. And when I teach now at the higher ed level, I teach those that want to be school librarians. So I very much still teach in those curriculum courses for school librarians. I really do emphasize strong teaching and learning, even when I am talking about information literacy. And this is the area that I still continue to teach and research in. I've been involved in a lot of national committees. One of them that I'm still very proud of was in 2015, I was selected from a national pool of candidates to serve on a 7-member editorial board that revised and rewrote the AASL National School Library Standards and Guidelines. So that appointment really did continue to shape my research and my practice, and that really also kind of shapes what I am going to talk with you all about today here. The continuum crosswalk that I did work on. Now that I have shared a little bit about myself, and I really did try very, very hard to have a poll to do this, so we're gonna have to do it a little bit the old-fashioned way. I really wanna know who you all are. I know many of you know each other, but I'm interested to know, how many of you are working in education and how many of you are more on the library side, whether it's academic or public libraries, as we go forward here today. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should still see the reaction buttons, even though we don't have a traditional poll. So I'm gonna go one by one. Are there any just K-12, and I shouldn't say just because I love you all teachers. Are there any K-12 teachers not in the library, but in a classroom here with us today? You could use your reactions. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you should see a little reaction button. You can give me a thumbs up in your reaction buttons. No K-12 teachers. All right, so I know there's a lot of academic librarians here, and you all are a rowdy bunch anyway. So maybe give me a thumbs up or even a clap, because you know you all are the exciting bunch. So yeah, I figured there would be a bunch more of you academic librarians here. It looks like there's several. All right, guys, I'm gonna have to ask you to calm yourselves down and remove your emoji. So how about public librarians? Are there public librarians here? So a few of you, just a couple smattered in. How about school librarians? Are my school librarian people here? Oh, yay, there are a few of you here. Good. So a few school librarians to join the conversation. How about library educators, those of you teaching in higher ed? Okay, a couple of you. Are there any students joining today? Any library students? Are some of you claiming to be students? I know some of you here that have your thumb up. You are not. Okay, there are a few library students. Good. How about administrators? Anybody identify as an administrator? No, so we could talk bad about them. No, just kidding. And how about an other? You just are in a pool by yourself. I don't really know who you might be, but is there anybody that doesn't identify as any of these? Okay, so you're all in one of these categories. That's really great. Thanks for doing that. It helps me know who's kind of here and in the mix today. So as we continue our conversation, thanks. So I do want to frame our conversation today around the crosswalk that I worked on, and in order to do that, some of you may be a little more familiar with the ACRL frameworks, and some of you may be a little more familiar with the AASL standards. So I'm going to do really high level overview of these two documents. I'm not going to bore you with a too heavy a deep dive into them, but the frameworks, a quick overview of how they came about. Really the ACRL frameworks for information literacy in higher ed. This came out of a task force, and really we have to think back. There was already a previous set of what was called the standards that was developed in 2000. There were these standards, and they were doing okay. I won't say that they were, you know, highly embraced, but people were using them and were teaching information literacy with them. And then a task force in 2013 recommended, hey, perhaps we need to look at them and see if they need an update and a refresher, which is pretty standard. Every 10 to 12 years, standards go through a revision period. And in 2013, that task force was seated to revise that standard set. And they realized that, hey, these would need a significant revision. So through a rotation of task force members over a period of time, this revision happened. And in 2014, what they put out was what is the early draft of the frameworks. And this was actually a significant revision because they took away what was a working set of standards and gave us what is now the frames. These went out for public consumption, if you will, and were given in draft form for hearings and comments and feedback, and all of that was taken into consideration and put into the final set, which was then adopted and put into implementation at the ALA Midwinter Conference in 2015. At that point, professional development began and implementation started on these frames, and now here we are 5 years later. So I have a couple more questions for you, especially those of you that are working on these. So you can just give me a thumbs up for some of these. Who's been using the frames in their information literacy instruction? So a few of you, it looks like, not many. Who feels like they're proficient or better in using the frames at this point? 5 years in, I have to say, there's not a whole lot of people that feel like they're rock starring it with their frames. We're still going through a lot of implementation, professional development on their frames. That's not a critique of them. It just means that these were kind of revolutionary for our information literacy instruction. Who continues to feel intimidated by the frames at this point in their information literacy instruction? Nobody's intimidated, you just don't like using them? Okay. All right, so at the same time that these frames were being adopted and now placed into use and implementation, the AASL National School Library Standards were up for revision. Again, nothing against the previous set, which had been, going on. It was just their time to go through revision. So an editorial board was seated and selected for the AASL revision. The previous iteration was actually 2 sets. We had standards, which was used for the learners. That was the standards for the 21st century learner, which had been created and adopted in 2007. And then we had the program guidelines empowering learners, which had been created and adopted in 2009. So there were 2 individual sets, one that we use with learners, one that we use just to guide the school library program. Information literacy had been embedded within the learner set of standards. So it wasn't its own thing like the frames, it was embedded within learner standards in K-12 education. So to begin the revision work, a national survey was conducted. This was done before drafting. So unlike the ACRL standards where a draft was created and then they asked for feedback, this group asked for feedback through surveys, focus groups, and then they created an initial draft. So a little bit of a different process. Then they put out the final product. In 2017, they did a huge pre-launch at their national conference. This followed with professional development and a big implementation plan, which was led by an entirely different task force. So, a few questions for this group as well. Ooh, I didn't want to switch this. I wanted to ask you all questions. Excuse my maneuvering of I want to see all your responses, so I have to make you all big. So tell me, who owns a copy of the full text of the AASL National School Library Standards at this point? Does anybody own a copy of the full text? The full text, by the way, costs $200 or $100 if you are eligible for a discount. So it's okay to say that you don't own the full text. Nobody owns a full text. I don't know, can you all see the responses when I make this box big? I'm not sure if you all are seeing this. I wanted to have a poll. So if you don't own a copy, perhaps you just have the small downloaded PDF. Does anybody have a free copy of the PDF that they use the AASL standards to plan information literacy instruction at this point? Anybody using the AASL standards to guide information literacy instruction planning? Nobody. So nobody's using these for information literacy in this group.
Elizabeth, I think we have some people in the chat that are saying that they.
Oh, I don't see anything popping up in the chat. Thank you, because I don't have my chat showing. Thank you. I'm missing your conversation. Let me pop over to the chat. Thank you for telling me that there's something going on that I'm missing. They are yep. I am sorry I've missed this whole conversation. Let me catch up with you all. Right, the PDF that's printed out. So when you say April, are you talking about April Dawkins? I'm asking.
April Dawkins.
Yeah. So let me clarify, just because I know April. April and I are buddies. When you say that April helped write it, I just want to be clear that April did not help write it. April is wonderful, and she has written a wonderful set of standards, not these. She has written the preparation standards for school librarians in a preparation program. Her standards are wonderful. They're different from these standards for school, for those in practice, learners in practice. So April has written a set of standards, and she does use them for preparing school librarians. It's a different set of standards. So the difference is we have standards for preparing school librarians in our school library programs. Those are the standards that I'm held accountable for, making sure that my students know and are competent in before I send them out into the world to be school librarians. Once they are school librarians and they are in practice, then they have a set of standards that they must make sure that their K through 12 students are competent in before they become engaged citizens in the world or go into your college and university libraries to go on and do great things. Does that make sense? Okay, I'll say it a different way. So we have, AASL has two different sets of standards. We have standards at the preparation level in school library preparation programs. I have to make sure that my school librarian pre-service candidates have knowledge in 21st century learning, have knowledge in diverse books, have knowledge in the research process, so that they are able to go out and teach K-12 learners how to engage with material in those areas. I'm teaching them, just like Common Core is a set of standards that K-12 learners are responsible for knowing. But the National Association of English Teachers has a set of standards that we prepare English teachers with. The National, the C3 framework, and that's a bad example. The National Social Studies teachers prepare their social studies teachers to be able to teach the C3 framework. Correct. The ASL standards are like the Common Core, what the K-12 learners learn. But we prepare English teachers to teach English. We prepare social studies teachers to teach social studies. We prepare science teachers to teach science, so that they can go out and teach those subject areas. So the ASL standards are like the subject area in the K-12 realm. Correct. There's no library in Common Core, so this is our branch of Common Core, and that's a terrible analogy, but yes. So April's standards are part of the continuum of learning, but they're separate. Sorry to have missed your chat because I didn't realize that you all were talking there. So I'm gonna keep this open now. And also, sorry to have not answered any questions. So now I'm a little more aware. All right. So I have finished this. So where do we go from here? Each of the documents really treat information literacy in a very unique way. The purpose of the ACRL framework was all about information literacy instruction and guiding the college and university level student through information literacy. The ASL standards talks all about teaching students about good information skills, and one part of that is information literacy. But they both did have a big shift in purpose all along the way. They both shifted from outcomes-based to competency-based, where you could join at any time and you're just measuring demonstrated growth over time. They both put a greater value on process. This is the official definition of information literacy from ACRL, and ASL didn't even address an official definition of information literacy. But for those of you working with students, growth and change is not always evident. And I'll tell you, I hear frequently from recent graduates who are now school librarians in elementary school, Dr. Burns, I don't think the previous librarian ever taught information literacy instruction. And then my middle school librarians tell me, I don't think the elementary librarian ever does information literacy instruction. And then my high school librarians tell me, I don't think students ever did any inquiry projects because they don't seem to know anything about information literacy. And guess what my academic librarian colleagues will say to me? I don't know what those school librarians are doing down there because my students get to me at the college level and they don't know anything about information literacy. So I'm probably pretty sure that if I asked you all, you would say, when students get to me, they know very little about information literacy instruction. Which led to this project. It's a crosswalk because in education, we do love a good crosswalk. I believe that the public says it too, Lori. So this full article is published. It was published in school libraries worldwide in the January edition. And with so many teachers and so many school librarians and so many of my academic colleagues saying, you know what, people just don't come to us with the skills and the knowledge of information literacy instruction. What can we do? I really thought, you know what, I believe that somebody's teaching information literacy. I'm gonna go back and just share this information literacy definition so that, oh, I'm trying to grab it. I'm gonna leave it up there for a minute because I can't grab it from the slide. So we're all on the same page. I believe that with so many people teaching information literacy, this is straight from the ACRL frameworks document, that somebody's teaching this, but we really needed to discover where exactly is the breakdown between K-12 and the academic and college and university experience. So I reached out to Don Latham and Melissa Gross at Florida State University who were doing a lot of really good work at the college and university level. They were exploring the frames, and we decided to really do a deeper dive into these two sets of documents to see, are there any alignments and where might some of the gaps be? So we did a one-way crosswalk analysis. We began looking at the ACRL frames, and we just started matching up, looking at each and every one of the competencies in each of the learner shared foundations for ASL. To conduct our analysis, we just looked at each element individually, then we got back together. We had a conversation to decide, was there any congruence, any alignment, and then we created a long crosswalk document, which is part of the final article. We used quantitative content analysis to identify the frequency with which specific verbs appeared in each document, and we looked for consistencies and differences across the two documents. The information literacy skills and practices were intended outcomes, and the two documents did lack some common vocabulary. Therefore, it was not always a direct alignment. So, some interesting things that we did find. There are some really similar learning domains in between these two documents. The ASL document calls them domains: think, create, share, grow. This was carried over from the previous set, but really it's talking about the cognitive, psychomotor, developmental, and affective domains. ACRL calls this the meta-literacy and really uses that same language, the cognitive, psychomotor, affective domain matched up to knowledge, skills, and attitude or disposition. So we did find some really, really robust key findings that were kind of foundational between the two documents. But then we started seeing that some of these domains really, beyond allowing the instructor to decide, how we're going to approach some of these, there really were some other key similarities that we could look at that show where exactly is the strongest alignment. Research is inquiry, the frame, research is inquiry, had the highest number of matches, just straight, aligned matches. 33 out of the 68 ASL competencies had a match. It was across different competencies, across different shared foundations, but 33 of them actually matched. That's 49% had matched competencies. Scholarship is conversation also had a high number of matches of 27 or 40%. So those were the two frames that had the greatest alignment. That's where we seem to be doing the better job in placing an emphasis in our intent. Here you could see that there was a great number of correlation in these two specific ASL competencies. So the first one, this adopting a discerning stance toward points of view and opinions expressed in information resources and learning products, had 4 different areas of alignment within the ACRL frames. And then understanding the ethical use of information. So there was a high degree of alignment on ethical use. These were the only 2 that had 4 areas of alignment. Everything else was 3 or less, and many times there was only 1 point of alignment. That was the good news. We saw lots of gaps in information. There were 6 ASL competencies that did not align. A lot of this had to do with the idea of collaboration. There's an entire shared foundation called collaboration in the ASL shared foundations in the ASL standards. 3 required direct interaction with others in those that did not have any alignment in the ACRL frames. So it's not surprising that 3 that didn't align didn't find equivalency when they talked about interacting with others. It was definitely easier to find alignment for those that were skills focused because teaching skills is easier to identify. 16 knowledge practices didn't find alignment in any ASL competencies. Language is one area that is definitely something that should be considered to bridge the gap in information literacy instruction. Many of the elements on the chart that were not represented in terminology in the ASL standards include emphasis on authority, public domain, and search processes. So those are areas that our students are just probably not hearing in K-12, and therefore there's a gap when they get to the academic or university setting. 11 dispositions did not align. And then there's also a difference in emphasis. So I'm going to show you what this actually looks like in the charts. There's a lot of just information to gather. So here were the ASL competencies that didn't align. Again, lots focusing on collaborative practices. These were the knowledge practices that didn't align. And I want to just point out that the labeling schema, we developed a labeling schema that there is no 1, 2, 3 Roman numeral. In the frames, we made a similar scheme just so that it could easily be named without writing the entire title. And we just identified the first one as the first alphabetically represented in the frames document. So I'm not sure what you mean, Esther, by language instruction. Could you clarify that question? And finally, here's the dispositions that did not align. Oh, it's not language instruction. The language is not similar across the 2 documents. So when we think about dispositional attitudes, sometimes it helps to think about behaviors that our students portray when they are going through an information processing behavior. There are somewhat competing priorities between the 2 documents, and when we see 2 different sides of the same coin, a lot of times this comes up with good habits of information learning to be developed early to form that independent scholar, which is what we're hoping to see when they interact with the frames. This can be demonstrated in cognitive behaviors of maximizers and satisficers, 2 types of students who each need to be trained into better information literacy behaviors. Maximizers, I'm sure you've all seen them. They come in, they find too much information on a topic, or they may not even be able to narrow a topic, and therefore end up failing in their quest to become solid information process users. They need to meet certain criteria, but sometimes they are not successful, or perhaps they're so successful that they have an overabundance and still they may not meet the criteria for the assignment at hand. Our satisficers find a superficial response that appears to meet the need, but because they are quick to find an information solution, they never really go through the information seeking process. And so the satisficer may find a source that has information on a topic, but it may not be the most current or the most authoritative source, or it may be written with intentional bias. And so they never really become true scholarly information seekers or information users. The maximizer may not have narrowed the focus enough and therefore may not be able to synthesize the information enough. So sometimes when we see these dispositional behaviors come into play, neither one is really successful. They've learned bad behaviors and they've been reinforced over time because they've never truly come in to they've never really come into an experience where they've gone through information literacy in a truly learned, steady process that takes them at the beginning all the way through to the end. These dispositions tend to repeat themselves as negative behaviors throughout. So, how can we strengthen this behavior? This is where we start to see the suggestions for improvement. So, what can we do? Some opportunities include at the college and university level, academic librarians may foster that more collaborative opportunity to include the potential for feedback. K-12 students are used to working together, seeking and receiving feedback, and seeing that progress over time. Typically, they leave that comfortable setting at the K-12 point. They enter into academic settings where that may not be the style that is fostered. They're left to their own devices. They no longer have that collaboration opportunity. They're no longer asked to, nor are they given the immediate opportunity for feedback. And so they're left to be that independent scholar. Maybe bridging that gap for collaboration is one way to strengthen that information literacy process. Also, high school librarians might become familiar with and introduce the elements of the frameworks, particularly those not present in the AASL standards, that they will be expected to know at the university and college level. Having the ideas that are present that they're not exposed to, particularly in those upper level high school classes, so that they're prepared when they get to the college and university level. Also, and this is what I want to talk with you about at the very end here, is beginning to build a standardized language used in information literacy instruction across the PK-12 continuum. If we're going to consider a path forward, we need to look at these areas that continuously show a deficit: authority, collaboration, independent scholar, deficits in terms of the search process, and deficits in a common terminology and language, so that we can start to build a bridge in these areas to strengthen instruction for our students. In our last few minutes, together, I do want us to take a little time to work toward building our common understanding and looking at the language and information literacy. One finding of our study was that both documents were very heavy with jargon. For instance, in Curate Grow 2, it states, integrating and depicting in conceptual knowledge framework their understanding gained from resources. That's just a bunch of words like word soup. It's possible that this competency may have aligned more closely if some of the vocabulary were simplified. I'm going to say it again for you. Integrating and depicting in a conceptual knowledge framework their understanding gained from resources. So to capture our thoughts, I've created a Google Doc that we're going to access. We don't have a lot of time, but I would like for us to spend maybe 5 minutes on it. In this document, you'll see keywords pulled from each of the frames, knowledge, practices, and again from each shared foundation of the standards. I did not use the dispositions or the growth domain here, choosing to focus this exercise on just the practices. It has a little bit.ly. Hopefully you can access it pretty easily that way. It's just https:// // Hopefully you're familiar with bit.lys. And then it's EB for my initials, EB, and then Tatler for your conference. In this document, you'll see the keywords pulled from each of the knowledge practices and then the shared foundations. They're just not the whole thing, just the keywords. So hopefully you can get there. I'm going to switch my screen in a minute for you to get there. I just want us to spend a little bit of time looking at this and thinking about the questions. Let me get there. Looking at the questions at the end. So that we might begin to hold on, I'm getting there. This is not my Zoom, and I'm usually very speedy on my Zoom. Here we are. Answering the questions at the end so that we might begin to think about what terms should be included in a standardized information literacy vocabulary. Which ones are just so jargony that maybe they just belong in the documents, but not in our instruction? And then which ones might we begin to share and collaborate across our PK20 communities to teach us a common set of terms for information literacy language? We can't really do any work until we start a conversation. So I hope we can spend about 5 minutes to start this conversation. And really, this document's not going anywhere. It won't be removed at the end of the session. Feel free to come back and revisit it. Feel free to come back later today, later this summer. Sometimes our best learning comes from that metacognitive learning that is in that developmental domain that, you know, really activated after we look at others' ideas, come back, share our thoughts, new information, reflect on and engage with others. So I do hope that you will put some ideas and some thoughts here and share your ideas. I agree that systematic schema, whoever is who is putting that there, I love it. So I'm gonna let us look at this for just a few minutes, and then I'm gonna switch back over and take any final questions. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy and your attentiveness today.
And while we're kind of waiting, just in the interest of time, I did post the links to the rest of today's presentations. If you didn't see my note earlier, all of these are being recorded and links will be shared later.
I'm going to stop sharing this document. You all have it. I'm going to just switch back out. And I'm just going to give you 2 more minutes to play on that document. And like I said, it's not going anywhere, and I do hope you will continue. That's all I have for you. I do, again, appreciate you spending this time with me today. I welcome any final questions. I know we're about out of time. This is my contact information. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me through email. That's my directory page. If you just can't get enough of me and you want to read the article, the citation is there, or anything else that I've done. I appreciate you having me this morning. I plan to be around this afternoon with Nora to continue a conversation on the frames and dispositions. So I so much appreciate being here with you this morning. I'm happy to take any final questions.
I just want